Hello, everybody. My name is Christoph Wöll. I'm the director of this institute, and I have the pleasure to tell you some more details of our honorary speaker today. Veronica Ganduglia-Pirovano has a very interesting career. I can already tell this in advance. She started her education in Argentina at the University of Bariloche in physics. So she received her first education in theory already, and the title of her master thesis was Study of the Adiabatic Regime for Time-Dependent Quantum Systems, rather involved topic in theory. After receiving her master, she decided to come to Germany. She went to Stuttgart to join the Festkörperforschung, the Max Planck Institute for Solid State Research, where she worked with Peter Fulde, a very well-known person, and she received then her PhD carrying the title Electron Correlation in the Ground State of Semiconductor Application to Silicon and Cubic Boron Nitride. So this was a very important step in her life, of course, receiving her PhD. But if I also may add, also her two daughters were born in Stuttgart. After that, she continued doing theory and stayed at several places, including the Fritz Haber Institute in Berlin and the Humboldt University in Berlin. And she received her habilitation then after shifting from physics to chemistry. So the habilitation was awarded in theoretical chemistry. And her mentor, if I may add this, for the habilitation was Joachim Sauer, who may be known at least to the German members of the audience. After receiving her habilitation, she stayed as a postdoc at several places, including Denmark with Professor Nørskov, and then again at the Fritz Haber Institute. But after this time, she accepted a position in Spain, in Madrid, where she has established her own group, which has gained, if I may so, international visibility. So she's working on oxide surfaces, chemistry on oxide surfaces, and our own collaboration started with a problem. At my institute, we look at infrared spectra of carbon monoxide absorbed on several oxides, and we had a problem in assigning our results for carbon monoxide absorbed on especially type of ceria surfaces, cerium oxide, and we couldn't explain our data. There were problems. And then I think it was at the Gordon conference where Veronica was invited as a speaker. I contacted her because all other people I had asked before told me that she's the expert on ceria, on molecules on ceria. So I contacted her, and she scratched her head and thought a little bit. But to cut a long story short, we now have a joint paper in Physical Review Letters, which is one of the most important journals in the field, with her as a senior author, which offers the explanation for the problems and also presents a solution. And so we were quite happy to eventually attract her here to Karlsruhe. And with this, I would like to hand over. Veronica, stage is yours, please.
First of all, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. Thanks for the introduction. And well, I got some instructions that this talk should be a bit for general audience, but I see so many experts that probably you can go back and look football or something, because it may be very elementary, but this is what I was instructed to discuss a bit. So I would like to discuss a bit, not exactly the topics of the collaboration right now, but what is that we are doing, and is the rational design, and I will mention what it is later, of materials, and I mean catalytic materials for energy production and a cleaner future. And so I don't know, I think most of you know, but some people may not know, I mean, presumably in a general audience. So what is a catalysis and what is a catalyst? And so this goes back to Berzelius, that he was trying to investigate the decomposition of hydrogen peroxide in water and oxygen. And there he found something, and he expressed it in very kind of funny ways, I would say. So he figured out that when he had some substances, the decomposition was happening, and these substances were not appearing in the products, namely water and hydrogen, but something was happening, and he says that he didn't know what was happening, but he says that they were acting by means of a force of unknown nature, looks a bit mysterious, and he called this force catalytic force, and the decomposition that it acts is what he called catalysis. And now this catalytic force, he says, is reflected in the ability to awaken activities in molecules that at the different temperature would be like sleeping the molecules. So I like this definition of catalysis. Nowadays, we would say something like catalysis is the acceleration of a chemical reaction by the addition of these substances, and this substance is a catalyst. And a catalyst is a complex system, as you will see, that accelerate the reactions without being consumed, as it was said before. So this is catalyst. So actually catalysis is nothing but awaken molecules. This is basically what you want to do. And with that, you want to accelerate a chemical reaction. So how does a catalyst look like? Horrible. So this is a kind of powder like this. Sometimes you have a kind of structure and you impregnate a catalyst. But if you look at this in detail, it looks a bit like that. A catalyst is something like a support, which in general is an oxide. Christoph mentioned this cerium oxide. And basically, you can imagine the support is a bit like a tray where you put something on top. And this on top are nanoparticles, metal nanoparticles. And this is the structure you would see. And why this structure? Because in catalysis, less is more. Why? Because now you have the oxide support, and the catalysis takes place at the surface of this active phase, let's say the metal phase. And then if you have this kind of nanostructure, then you would have more surface exposed. And then, of course, you would use less of these metals. And these metals are expensive. So, of course, you would use less of it and exposing more surface. And the catalysts work this way. So this is, you have reactants in a gas phase and the products. And without the catalyst, then you would need to surmount an activation energy barrier, which is typically very high. And this is what this guy was saying. The molecule seems to be sleeping because nothing was happening. And when you put a catalyst, the thing what happens is the following, that actually you would chemisort the molecules on the surface of your catalyst. And in this, and we will see example, then this activation barrier is smaller. And this is all about catalysis. And the catalyst actually acts this catalysis, which is the lowering of the activation barrier. And at the end, you get an accelerated reaction. So this is it. And so what are the challenges for catalysis in the future? So you can go back to see the science and technology roadmap on catalysis for Europe. And here they say that the grand challenges, and I think today even more, is the evolving energy scenario. And of course, the energy now, we see how problematic the topic is, and the cleaner and sustainable future. So we need to, what it also says here, that these are the challenges, and in order to address these challenges, you need to address the complexity of the catalyst. This is one thing that it says. And actually, it also says that we need to go through new approaches, and these approaches has to be knowledge-driven. What does it mean, knowledge-driven? Means that we need to advance. This is all inside this booklet, if you want a book. So it says that we need to advance in the design of this novel catalyst, And this has to base on knowledge. Knowledge means understanding at the microscopic level, and this is the kind of work we do, how these catalysts work from this molecular scale, if you want, to the industrial scale, of course, important. And this is the part where our work sits. And why we do that? Because we are all convinced that if we understand at the molecular level how the geometry, basically where the atoms are and where the electrons are, that is the electronic structure, if one can correlate microscopic structure with the catalytic function, then we were able to say why it works and why not. And with this understanding, we will be able to help in the more rational design of the improved or new catalytic systems. And how are we going to do this if the systems are like this? So, well, this seems hopeless in a way. So this is a real catalyst where you have a support which exposes different facets, and then you have nanoparticles on top of these supports. So very difficult to model or to understand at the microscopic level how it's working. But again, we want to tell you what is the nature of the active site, who is doing what, who's awakening which molecule and where and why. And of course, then we will also try to understand reaction mechanisms. So the idea here is to simplify this problem and to model these problems. How are we going to model this? Trying to understand. Well, the modeling can come from two ways. One modeling could be experimentalist, like many of you, doing model systems, and theory, doing model systems. The experiments, and these are our colleagues, do model systems. For example, let's say instead of having this polycrystalline cerium oxide, we'll take one specially oriented surface where they know where the atoms are. And now they may put like metals, but then they would know exactly the loading, etc. They will have control experiments, but again, not too simple, because you may land in these gaps. That is, if you want to, and this we will see it, if you want to, instead of having a nanostructure nickel on a series support, you would try to understand just this by looking at an extended nickel surface, then you have probably a materials gap. That is too simple. So this you have to be aware, and this you know better than me. There's many techniques that you could use. Here in this group of Christoph, they are looking a lot about vibrational spectroscopy, and in this sense we are collaborating. But you see a lot of techniques where you could look at the electronic structure, absorption sites, reaction intermediates, reactivity, etc. So all of this information is there or might be there, or you could look at this. And what we do is the following. This is the model catalyst from this computational model catalyst. Of course, compared to this is much closer than to these guys. But nevertheless, it is the synergy between these three different worlds, if you want, what at the end of the day will bring us forward in understanding the systems. And again, we can calculate, similar to the experiment, but in the computer, electronic structure, binding sites, elementary steps, etc. And I think for the non-experts in calculations, I want to say one word to justify my existence. So how we do this? Of course, for the theoreticians, this is an obvious thing. But now I have to create a model in my computer, and I have to calculate a structure, optimize the structure, and tell you how it looks like. And to do this, let's say this is an example. This is a cerium oxide surface, particular orientation. I have a nickel-13 cluster. I have a carbon here. This is a cartoon. I have two hydrogens there. In this kind of model, I have 70 atoms and about 4,200 electrons. And in order to optimize and give you the ground state energy, I have to solve this problem. This is a quantum mechanical problem, the Schrödinger equation. How I'm going to do this? Well, I could say, well, maybe not all electrons are important, so I can take just the outermost electrons, and I'm down to 700 electrons. Still a lot of electrons, a lot of atoms. So the problem to solve is this one. I have to solve this problem of interacting particles. These are the electrons, and this is the position of the ions. And I have to solve this all together. This we cannot solve. So you need a Nobel Prize to tell you how to solve it. And this is this guy. So this is Walter Kohn, he passed away, but this was a real Nobel, excellent and a Nobel person that I had the pleasure to know personally. And he will tell you what to do. So he will tell you that exists the so-called density functional theory, that we can prove everything, but I will not go into this detail. But he says, well, actually, what is important is that you find the ground state energy, electron density, where the electrons are and how they are distributed in space and energy. This is what you have to find for your real system. And then if you do have this, then you can calculate the ground state energy because it depends on this density. This is what he says. But also with this, you cannot solve much, but at least he has proven. But he got another great idea, which is the following. He says we can map this world in this one. And this world is a world of non-interacting particles in an effective potential. But the key thing is that the density, electronic density of these two guys is the same. And this one I can solve. And how are we going to solve this? Well, he put this problem in this equation and you land, I will not, of course, prove it, but you land in some equations, which is the Kohn-Sham equations. And these you can solve self-consistently. And this is what me and many of you do basically mostly every day. So the key is this one, that this problem you could solve. Of course, there are some approximations, but this, when you try to really solve it, but I will not go into this detail. And so then we can use any codes. This is the one particular choice, the Vienna ab initio simulation package is the one I use. And there we can optimize structure, calculate forces, absorption energy, vibrational spectra, etc. So this is what I can calculate. And why this is challenging? Because now if I have the atom somewhere and I have to calculate this electron density, this is non-trivial because this, it looks a bit like this. As a function of the coordinates of these nuclei, then you have like a hypersurface where you have valleys and mountains and valleys and mountains and etc. And you want to calculate, for example, if I have, for example, methane, and we will come back to this on a model, here is a nickel cluster on a series support, and I want to calculate what is the initial state for the adsorption and the final state for the dissociation. I have to find in this surface what is the initial state and what is my final state to start with. And how are we going to do this? Well, for that, this is me every day, more or less. And these calculations are computationally very intense. We use supercomputers to solve these equations. And you see, for example, to calculate one initial state or a final state, I could use of these CPUs, like about 100 for 72 hours running just to calculate this optimization. And this is about the amount of hours that this takes. Okay, so I have initial state, final state. I have to, catalysis is all about looking at transition state structures. I mean, because I need to know how high is this mountain. And how are we going to do this? Well, for that, even more. So then, as I said, this is my initial state. Let's see, I locate it, a final state. And now I have to go through and try to find what we call the minimum energy path, namely the lower transition state structure. And this is computationally, you could do it. And basically, if I have this initial state and final state, and this is the only thing I will say about calculations, is that now you can imagine making like a band between the initial and final state, and you create images of your structures, and you kind of make a string between them. So we have like a string, like elastic band of between initial and final state. And there we will optimize this path by basically finding the path in which the force perpendicular to this path will be zero. And this is also expensive because now all of this has to be optimized together. So if I have, let's say, 5 images, then it's 5 times 96 times 72. To get one path, this is 35,000 hours of calculation. This is the result. So this is basically justifies our existence. And this is what it takes to solve the problem. Of course, you need to be clever enough to pick up the right path, etc., etc. But this is what it is. So now examples. And I want to tell you just one story maybe. And this is what I decided because I think it's simpler. And the one story is about what I said. One of the challenges is what about methane and CO2? We all know these are greenhouse gases. So better would be not to produce them. I mean, so mitigate the reducing this climate change. But if you have them, you rather do something and try to convert it to something, let's say, useful or more useful. And so these are some topics we have been working. So I think the one most important would be the direct oxidation of methane to methanol. So if you get this is very important. So this is what people call the holy grail in C1 chemistry. Of course, you can go from methane to methanol by different paths, but the direct one would be great to have. And this is important to have because from methane, that is a greenhouse gas, if you oxidize it directly to methanol, then you would have a liquid fuel that you could use. So I think this is a very active field of research. Other possibilities would be methane dry reforming. This is from the green point of view very important because now you get rid of 2 gases. Is methane, CO2, and you produce syngas. This is gas synthesis gas. And then you could use it to produce other things. Other thing is, which is also more or less fashionable, is to look at the methane. This is the dry reforming, and this would be the steam reforming because it's with water. And this is one of the processes to produce clean hydrogen. So this one has hydrogen, but a bit of CO. This is the methane steam reforming. And then you would have different reactions. This is called the water gas shift. We get rid of some of this CO. And in this last step, CO prox, you get rid of even more CO. So basically at the end, you have more or less clean hydrogen. So this is another reaction. So I will concentrate just on one example, which would be this. And why this is challenging and why this is such a holy grail to get. And the challenge is that you have to activate methane. And this is a very stable molecule. And so breaking or cutting these bonds, CH bonds, cost you a lot of energy. So you need typically very high temperatures. And typically, if you activate this one and you lose all the hydrogens, then typically you have carbon deposition on your catalyst, and then the story is over. Another problem is not only activate things in catalysis, but also this what we call the selectivity. And this is another problem here because this you can mix methane to oxygen and get methanol. This is what you want. But you can also mix methane and oxygen and get syngas. And sadly, this reaction is favored at a temperature which is about 600 Kelvin or larger. But if you need higher temperatures to activate the methane, you will always go this way. So this is the problem. So then how are we going to go through this way? So model catalyst, and this comes from experiments, and this is mostly done by the group of Jose Rodriguez in Brookhaven. And so he proposes the following. He says, well, this is his model catalyst, cerium-111 surface from the experimental point of view, and he has nickel nanoparticles on the series support. So this is the way he has the system. And so he puts nickel, metallic nickel, so each atom has 28 electrons. But now he puts it and he constructs this system. And so you remember what I was saying. So we need to find the electron density. Where are the electrons? Now I know where the atoms are, and the electrons, where are they? So if you have less than 28, then you would say is oxidized. So this is the question. So now I can calculate this. And this is the cerium oxide surface in my computer. So it is oxygen, cerium, oxygen, and these tri-layers repeats in the bulk. And this is looked from above. So now I can make like a toy model and put some nickel on top and see what happens. And this is what happened. I put 4 nickel atoms metallic. I construct such a, let's say, model of a nanoparticle on the cerium support. And what I obtain is that actually I put them metallic with the electrons they have. But when I look at the calculated electronic structure, electronic density, I see that 2 electrons are transferred from the metal to the cerium support. Here are they. So we will say in this case that the oxide is reduced. Whoever gets electrons is reduced. Whoever gives gets oxidized. So this is the system, and we would say that cerium got 2 atoms got 1 electron more. And what is this? Well, and for the ones knowing more about experiments, so they can also see it in experiments, so they can follow the nickel 2p states of these guys with using X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy. And you see when you have low loading, means this is in monolayers, very small amount of nickel, then they have the 2p will tell you that you have oxidized species, and you increase, and then you see this is metallic. So if you want to have oxidized species, this effect of the support is seen when you have low loading. So the conclusion of this is that the cerium oxide support, which you started thinking this is a tray to just put your nickel nanoparticles or metal nanoparticles, has nothing of innocency, because actually is affecting the electronic structure of the things you put on top. So now from the point of view of the chemistry, having someone oxidized or metallic, this is very important. And the thing is oxidized because you put this support, which is reducible. So this is what, this is the charge transfer or metal support interaction, which of course is important. So what about activating methane? So now we see, if we look at, instead of looking at this complex system, we look at the extended nickel surface, why not? Then methane will not be activated, or you will need very high temperatures to activate methane on the extended nickel metal. But experimentalists tell me the following, that if they use this low-loaded system, then they see methane activation even at room temperature. And I think this is very important, and you will see some of the experiments later. So what about theory? And you will see many of these barriers. This is what we calculate all the time. So if this is a model of a nickel 111 surface, you see I calculated a barrier of about 1 eV. That's a lot. So it's no wonder that this will not happen at certainly room temperature. You will need very high temperature to go from here to this side. But if I look at my model of nickel oxidized on the cerium support, which I just talked about it, then I see that the barrier is notoriously decreased. So methane is really awakened in this system. And this is, so this nickel oxidized species, which is the result of these metal support interactions, indeed enhance or help you enhance the reactivity to cleave CH bonds. Okay, so this is the result. You can be happy with this, but we are typically asking at the microscopic perspective, why it is so. And the why it is so, we will look at this in a minute. Let's look at the initial state. So the methane comes kind of flying and sees the extended nickel surface. And this is the initial state as optimized. And these distances are in picometers. So it stays there. How about these small nickel particles on the support? Well, this is the result of the calculations. And you could see that the methane, in this case, first of all, the nickel is a nanoparticle that can move on the surface. This hardly moves because this is kind of rigid, extended surface. Here on the surface, this small cluster, people talk about fluxionality, if you want, because the molecule comes, things kind of adapt or change. And you see distances. Look at this. So this guy can come much closer to this active site compared to the extended nickel surface. So why can it come closer? Because now you have to look at where the electrons are, and you have to look at the electronic structure. And this guy sees something like this. So this is a d orbital of the nickel that points to this molecule that is coming, and in this case is occupied. So the molecule comes like this and feels this Pauli repulsion, stays where it is. In this case, remember, we had this metal support interaction. And this was what? This was electrons transfer from these guys to this one. In this case, I will not show the orbitals, not to put more information, but in this case, you have transfer of electrons from here to here. It's a bit like a ligand effect, and this guy here is partially deoccupied because of the transfer. So these guys sees less repulsion, can come closer. The consequences of this is now that because it comes closer, some charge can go in the other direction as well, and this is what it's doing. And the result is that now charge is transferred to this bond, and then you see this carbon-hydrogen bond is stretched compared to this. So in the initial state, this guy is already stretched. This is the awakening that we were talking. And now it will cost you less to break it even more, if you want, to cleave it. So this is the result. And then, so this, we're happy because we said we understood how these molecules are awakened on this surface. So we say, well, I mean, now is what Christoph was mentioning. So sometimes experiments are theory as experiments. So we had those results, and then we say, Jose, I mean, why only nickel? There might be something else, because there might be other metals that behave the same. So we did calculations, and they did also other metals, and they did nickel, but also cobalt and platinum on the series support. So this is the barriers as calculated. So this is the extended nickel surface. We had 0.9. Here is even larger or smaller. These are very large barriers. These are single atoms. People talk about this is very fashionable, single atom catalysis. Is not what I'm talking about, but still we put one atom to see what is the effect. And these are these small clusters you have just seen. So we calculated all these barriers, these you have just seen, nickel, platinum, cobalt, all of them would activate methane for the same reasons. And so from the point of view of the platinum is expensive, but tends to be more active. So you may want to say, if you happen to have single sites, maybe this could do something, but I'm not claiming single site catalysis. Nevertheless, so we understood all of this, but now we activated the first hydrogen bond. So what about the other hydrogen bond? I mean, hydrogen bond, the CH bond. The thing is that the system is active, but maybe too active, because not only loses the first hydrogen, can lose all of them. So you see, methane could go from here, lose all the hydrogens, still gets a carbon. And this is what they see in the experiment, and you will see in a minute. But this is something, for example, this is an example that the theory can also support this observation. Why? We have the first hydrogen abstraction. We saw this number many times. And now I go from CH3 in one shot to CH. This is the result of the calculation. I lost 2 hydrogens, and you see the barrier is moderate. And you can continue like this, but I will not show this. So actually, the system is active not only for the first, but for the rest. And this is something important, because we are talking about making methanol. And in methanol, you want to go directly from first hydrogen abstraction, CH3 methyl, and then methoxy. But if you lose all the hydrogen, you want to stop it here somehow. And this will not happen as it is. So we remember this for the next. And so experiments, for those caring about more experiments. So I want to show that indeed this happens. So this is XPS. They are looking at the carbon 1s. And this is the intensity of this peak. So what you are seeing here is room temperature, just methane on this nickel ceria, low loading. You see this peak and this peak. This peak corresponds to any of these species. And this peak is a proof that you could dehydrogenate up to the end. And the loading is important because you see when you increase the loading, funny things happen. And this is what you don't want. The same happens with platinum. You get these two peaks. The same happens with cobalt. You get these two peaks. So all of them work. And this is what's happening. Fully dehydrogenation if you want. So now we want to, this is definitely like this. So now we want to go and try to see how are we going to go through the direct oxidation of methane to methanol, is what I was saying. So if methane loses all the hydrogens, how are we going to form methanol? That's the first question. So experiments. What these guys tell us is the following. So now we put methane and oxygen, just this, no water. And they see that we had this selectivity problem, we have this reaction and this other reaction. So if there is no water in the game, they see practically no methanol and everything goes to CO2. But they found the following, that if they put some water, things can change and the selectivity can go increase up to 30%. That's already something. I mean, of course, it's not perfect. We have to improve. But then you go from nothing to 30% by adding some water. So the question is how this methoxy forms and what is the role of water? Because if there is no water, the thing is not happening. So this was the question to us. And we tried to look. Okay, so we say methane, no problem. The system very active, I can break CH bonds. But water is OH bonds. How are we going to activate OH bonds? Is this active? And the question is yes, the system not only helps you to activate CH bonds, but also OH bonds. This is a work we have done a while ago already on these systems, and you see the barrier is also. But here I have to stop 1 minute to note the following. We see these sites, which is all interface, which are oxidized because of the support. And remember, on top of those sites, we activate CH bonds. But on top of the same sites, we activate OH bonds. And this is going to be important because these two sites, these two OH and CH will be activated on the same site. And this is going to be important because now we have methane that fully dehydrogenates, water can be activated, and oxygen, no problem, on this nickel will dissociate. So we have all of these together, and the question is again the same. So how water helps that methoxy forms? And for that, we need to put all of them together and let them play on the model and to see what we see. And this is what we do. And here I will show many of these barriers, but try to go accompany you with the result. So look, so we start with our model, but we have some oxygen on top. This is the first starting point. I put methane, fine, methane dissociates, barrier very moderate. It's a bit different than this 0.14 we were seeing because now we have some oxygen on top, but still small. I get a methyl. So fine, I go CH3. And now I have to ask the question, do I lose one more hydrogen or form methoxy? This is the question you would ask. And the sad news here is at this point, the barrier to form CH2 is lower than to form methoxy. So the reaction will go on this way. This you don't like. So you add one water. The water adsorbs, dissociates, small barrier. I go up to this point. Here I ask the same question, CH2 or methoxy? And again, bad news. CH2 goes lower. So once more, another water, and like this. So here I will not go into the details. So you form methoxy finally, and then from there there is some kind of rearrangements of these molecules. I will not go into the details, all small barriers. And then from there you want to form methanol. And there we found a path that actually is a bit higher, the barrier, to form this methanol that you are looking for. So we figure out that if we add another water, then you form methanol that dissolves with a barrier which is half the size. So now this is the whole story, basically. So now we look what water has done. It has taken you, instead of here or here, water has kind of taken you along this blue path. And why it is so? It is so because it has changed the path, and I will show in a minute, as I said. So the whole point is try to avoid that CH3 loses all the hydrogens. And by putting these waters that competes for the same sites, what you do actually is you block the further decomposition. And this is what, finally, this is the role of water, and at the end provides this OH to form the methanol. So basically, this is the role of water in increasing the selectivity. And I don't know if I will be able to show this, maybe. So this is a kind of cartoon. Do I see it? No? Why it's not working?
Good.
So basically that's it. I didn't see it. So methane comes, lose the first one. Now comes the water, takes this one, takes the other one, blocks it, and then the last one gives the hydrogen so it can go. So basically, this is the idea. So if you have, it has to be sufficient enough water to kind of allow for one dehydrogenation, but not more. So this is the result. So I think with that, I will finish by saying that again, that certainly what we found is that these OH groups prevent the full decomposition of this methane or methyl groups. So you can sort of change the path to form methanol. And from the experiment, you see it. Because look, this is room temperature and this is methane. And you see, this is what we had before. Low loading, and then we saw the full decomposition. This is the CHX, and this is the COX. This is a kind of proof that it has lost all the hydrogens. But now if you add water to the feed, then this peak disappears. So this is exactly, you are blocking this, the full decomposition. So this is the proof that this is working like this. So with that, I think I will finish by saying that I hope to have convinced you that we were, I mean, at least for these examples, but we have many examples that going this way in interaction with theory and experiment and looking at the microscopic, from the microscopic view, we were able to show in this particular case how, for example, these molecules, in this case, very stable molecules, like methane and also water for this system can be awakened in the sense of catalytic activity. So how you could do this on this nanostructure system, and then the complexity has been very important because none of this would have been true if I would have modeled just a very large nickel particle that wouldn't care about the support, that is with metallic, or I would have even an extended nickel, more simplified extended nickel surface. So I think we are on the right way to sort of understand and approach these systems. And I want to say thank you, particular to Pablo Lustenberg, that some of you know, who has done many of these calculations. And then in particular, Jose Rodriguez at Sanjay and Brookhaven National Lab. Charlie has also contributed a lot to the discussion. I see Hiham also here when he was not here at KIT, and many of you that you probably know. So I want to thank all these people. Of course, these are the ones that I have collaborated just in these examples that I have shown. and computer time, of course, and funding, and you for your attention. Thank you.